Saddam Hussein. Now, for decades, that name was synonymous with power and controversy in the Middle East. His rule over Iraq, stretching from 1979 all the way to 2003, is this incredible story of absolute power, devastating wars, and global showdowns. And in a lot of ways, his story is the story of modern Iraq. So you have to ask, how did one man manage to completely dominate a country and end up challenging the entire world? Well, we're going to trace his journey, right from a poor village to the presidential palace, and really dig into the incredibly complex legacy he left behind. So, where does a story like this even begin? We're going to start at the beginning, looking at Saddam's early life and how he first stepped into the absolutely ruthless world of Ba'athist politics. His childhood was anything but stable. Born into real poverty near Tikrit, his father died before he was even born. The key figure for him growing up was his uncle, who just filled his head with these intense Arab nationalist and anti-imperialist ideas. That deep resentment of foreign influence, that would become the absolute core of his political identity. So when he moves to Baghdad in the 1950s, he finds his people, his political home, the Ba'ath Party. Its ideology was a perfect match for him. Arab nationalism, a bit of socialism, and a super fierce opposition to any Western power. This revolutionary movement, well, it became his ladder to the top. And let me tell you, he proved early on he wasn't just about talk. In 1959, he was part of a failed assassination attempt on the prime minister. And even though it failed, it totally cemented his reputation inside the party as a man of action. A committed and, a ruthless activist who was more than willing to use violence to get what he wanted. And that ruthless ambition, that would define his whole rise. So next up, let's explore how he went from being a party enforcer to becoming Iraq's undisputed ruler in the 1970s. Okay, so after the Ba'ath Party seizes power in a 1968 coup, Saddam isn't the top dog, not yet. He was the vice president, but really, his more important title was the regime's chief enforcer. Right away, he starts building this terrifying security apparatus, putting his loyal buddies from his own clan into all the key positions. You know what they say, follow the money. And for Saddam, the money was oil. In 1972, he oversaw the nationalization of Iraq's entire oil industry. And this move, it sent state income through the roof. We're talking 1,000% increase. That gave him a huge pile of cash to fund both national projects and his own tightening grip on power. And this is where you really see the central contradiction of his rule. With all that oil money, he was building schools, hospitals, new roads, stuff that won him a lot of popular support. But at the exact same time, he was expanding his secret police, purging the party of anyone he didn't trust, and just crushing any and all opposition. Modernization and repression, they went hand in hand. Then, in July 1979, he makes his final move. He basically forces the president to resign and takes the top job for himself. And his very first act as president? A televised show trial where he purges the Ba'ath Party of his supposed rivals. It was this chilling, public display of power designed to eliminate any threats and establish him, without a doubt, as the absolute dictator of Iraq. So, with total control at home, Saddam started looking abroad. Now we're going to turn to the conflicts that would come to define his reign and his legacy on the world stage. So what did define his rule internationally? The answer really is simple: war. Two absolutely devastating conflicts that would send shockwaves across the whole region and eventually bring him face to face with the world's superpowers. First up was the Iran-Iraq War. See, he was terrified that Iran's 1979 Islamic Revolution would spread to Iraq, so in 1980, he invaded. He thought it would be a quick, easy victory. Instead, he plunged his country into a brutal 8-year-long war of attrition with just staggering casualties on both sides. And the conflict was marked by just extreme brutality. Saddam's forces used chemical weapons, not just against Iranian soldiers, but also against Iraq's own Kurdish population. The most infamous example, of course, was the attack on the town of Halabja in 1988. This would later become a major charge in his trial for crimes against humanity. So that long war with Iran left Iraq completely devastated economically and drowning in debt. His solution? You guessed it, another war. In August 1990, he accused Kuwait of messing with Iraq's economy and sent his army in to invade and annex the tiny, oil-rich country. Well, this move triggered immediate global outrage. A US-led coalition just steamrolled the Iraqi army in the 1991 Gulf War. But even though his military and the country were shattered, Saddam himself clung to power. He brutally crushed uprisings at home and was left ruling over a crippled and isolated nation under crippling UN sanctions. So he was defeated, but he wasn't gone. And this pushed Saddam into a whole new phase. Well, now look at that long decade of the 1990s, when Iraq basically became a global pariah, almost completely cut off from the rest of the world. Iraq found itself totally isolated. The US and the UK were hostile, and his former allies in the Gulf deeply distrusted him. Now, the UN sanctions caused terrible suffering for the Iraqi people, but Saddam managed to maintain his iron grip by controlling all the resources and projecting this image of defiant nationalism. But that defiance couldn't last forever. All right, let's get to the final chapter, the swift and really dramatic end of Saddam Hussein's 24-year rule. The 9/11 attacks, they changed everything. In the aftermath, the U.S. administration accused Saddam's regime of having weapons of mass destruction and of having links to terrorism. Now, these accusations were never really substantiated with clear evidence, but they provided the public justification for the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And the fall was incredibly fast. The invasion began in March 2003, and Baghdad fell just weeks later. By December, Saddam himself was found hiding in a hole near his hometown. And within 3 years, the man who had ruled with absolute power for a quarter of a century was tried by an Iraqi court and executed. But here's the thing. The end of Saddam did not mean the end of Iraq's troubles. His death symbolized the end of an era, for sure, but it absolutely failed to bring peace. Instead, it kind of took the lid off these sectarian forces that plunged the country into years of brutal violence and conflict. So, how should we remember him? Honestly, the answer really depends on who you ask. To this day, Saddam remains this deeply polarizing figure. For some, he was a strong nationalist leader who built a modern state and stood up to the West. For many, many others, he was a brutal dictator whose ambition and cruelty left a legacy of trauma and instability that continues to haunt Iraq.